Okay. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Melissa Ritchie. I'm the founder and now Vice President of Preservation Mirage. I'm now Vice President because Dan Swartz has taken over as our president. And I'm actually going to be going to England with my husband, Jim, who's sitting beside me as my technical director. And we're going to go and live in England for a year, but I am going to carry on with Preservation Mirage and organizing, helping to organize these Zoom sessions. Today, we're holding this Zoom session via webinar because we wanted to create this panel for all of you to see, as well as the slides we're going to be showing. And the reason for doing it this way is because it really helps us to control the people that you see on screen. If we held this as a meeting, we'd be seeing all of you. And I know that's fun because you get to interact with everybody. But to manage this session in a sort of more formal way, we decided to set it up as a webinar to let you know that although you can't interact with us by voice or visually, you can ask Q&A. So at the bottom of your screen, if you scroll down, you'll find a Q&A section. In fact, John Orlin has just said, remember to hit record. He's been helping us in the background, one of our members. Yep, did it, John. And so you can ask questions in the Q&A, and we'll save those for the most part and answer them at the end of this session. And this is a bit of a trial run for us, so bear with us. I'm going to introduce you. It's my pleasure and delight to introduce you to three people who bravely agreed to be part of this webinar today. First of all, we have Janice Lyle, who is the director of Sunnylands. Janice has actually got a very long and varied history here in the Valley, and it's always a pleasure to have her involved in anything that we do because she's so integral to the culture of the Coachella Valley. She's been the director of Sunnylands since 2008, and she oversaw the restoration of the Annenberg estate, the construction of the center and gardens, and the building of the administrative campus. She manages the professional team that was responsible for the preservation, interpretation, and public aspects of Sunnylands. Before Sunnylands, she was the executive director of the Palm Springs Art Museum from 1994 to 2007. And for 10 years before that, she was director of the public programs there. She's written numerous articles and, of course, the Sunnylands book, America's Mid-Century Masterpiece, which if you don't have a copy of it, you absolutely need to have one. Absolutely sensational book, came out a couple of years ago. And she lectures extensively on modern architecture, preservation, museum topics. So my pleasure to introduce you to Janice today. Anne, for some reason, I didn't get a bio from you. So can you explain briefly to everybody what your role is? I know you're curator at Sunnylands, but just explain your role a bit more.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. Very briefly, I joined Sunnylands in 2009. I moved from the East Coast to the desert and started at Sunnylands. Prior to that, I worked in the museum world in Boston and the gallery world, nonprofit art associations, that sort of thing. So I've been sort of in the material culture business for 30 plus years.
Terrific. And then Frank Lopez is a second generation Californian. He obtained his master's degree in library science from UC Berkeley and held numerous information management positions at Chevron. He began his semi-retirement in Rancho Mirage in 2006 with his husband, Gary. And he then after arriving here, he took up archive positions at the Rancho Mirage Library, the Palm Springs Art Museum, where he created the Architecture and Design Archive, and that's how I first met Frank, and Sunnylands, where he established the archive and library. And he's been a Preservation Mirage member since the very early days. And actually, all three of these people on screen have played a role in my life, because I obviously had to do a lot of research for the book. I still do a lot of research for Preservation Mirage. And Frank and I are probably pretty nerdy when it comes to research subjects. I think we'd agree that we love digging deep. And Frank's always been a huge help to me in that level. And the reason that I approached Janice and Frank and Anne about this idea for Hidden Treasures and Archival Insights was really to, because I was so intrigued by the huge amount of material that must have existed at the Annenberg estate. And I was really wanting to know more after Anne and Frank both kind of gave me a hint about how much there really was. And so why this is Hidden Treasures and Archival Insights is that we're going to take you all the way back in time to way before 2012, when Sunnylands opened to the public, to have Janice and Anne and Frank explain to everybody what they found. So I'm going to share a screen now, and we're going to get started. Okay, so Janice, I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, keep talking.
Okay, can I hit the next? Yeah, let's hit this.
No.
Okay. All right. So Janice, talk to me about the importance of a collection like the one at Sunnylands, and explain to me a bit more about the historic site and the building and the landscape.
Sure. Well, I think when most people think about collections, they first think about a paintings collection or an object collection or maybe a book collection. But at Sunnylands, we actually extend that idea to buildings and to plants in the landscape. So Sunnylands could be seen as important for any one of its collections, but it's really amazing and unusual in its combination of so many collections in one place. So Sunnylands is important first, of course, for the people who live there, the Annenbergs themselves, and for the people who visited. And that aspect of our history provides a glimpse of 20th century American cultural history. So that's one important aspect of the place. Another, of course, is mid-century modern architecture. And we have probably the largest collection of A. Quincy Jones buildings that are available to the public in the country. So we have one of his largest residences. We have three small houses. They're called cottages. We have an A. Quincy Jones maintenance building. And just recently, we discovered an A. Quincy Jones office building on our site as well.
That's amazing.
In addition, interior design is an important part of the collection at Sunnylands. So we have almost all the furniture inside the historic house designed by William Haynes in his Hollywood Regency style. And again, we are the only publicly open house with a collection of Haynes furniture for people to see. Then there's the art side. So the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist paintings collection was deemed the finest private collection of such works in America in the 1990s when it was promised to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. So our digital reproductions reference that, but we still have a small 20th century sculpture collection on site, and we have lots of decorative arts. We have Chinese cloisonne, we have Steuben glass, there's silver gilt. So those smaller decorative objects actually enhance the experience at Sunnylands as well. And then, of course, the archives that we now have are filled with books and memorabilia. The Annenbergs kept everything during their lifetime that was at Sunnylands. And so that provides us with incredible access to original documents that help us to tell a story, to discover the story, and be accurate about it. And finally, we have a 200-acre estate, and it's a parkland in the desert. So the idea of heaven in the desert, which Sunnylands has been described as, really relates to and is reliant on this man-made landscape. And so that is another collection within the whole.
It's quite astonishing, and I don't think anyone ever really realized just how much of all those different facets of the different collections that exist. And it's only been in sort of talking about this with you before this session that I've realized the full scope of it. So I want to talk to Anne a bit about her experiences with making this a public collection. So I'm trying to get to the next slide. And I went back into screen share. Sorry, technical glitch.
So I can begin to say.
Yes. Okay, Anne. So tell me about the furniture collection.
Yes. So as Janice alluded to, there were masses of various collections in here, and we had no idea what was there. And so as we started excavating, we started making amazing discoveries. And I can't stress enough, you guys, how thrilling it is for those of us in the museum world or the material culture world in general, when collectors of this caliber decide to turn over all of their precious objects back to the public. Not all of these people do this, and it's a thrill when it happens. And what happens is when a collection like this, the doors fly open and the scholars and those enthusiasts who have certain interests, a lot of people have broad interests and they came to and continue to come, but there are people whose lives are sort of immersed in one narrative. And so these tables are just one example of many people who came forward to me as the collections manager to say, do you have this at Sunnylands? I've been looking for this my entire life, and I think it's there because somebody at Sotheby's in the back room told me it was there. Is it there? So this woman came from England. Her name is Eileen Harris, and she was thrilled that the Annenbergs had turned this collection back to the public. And she said she had a fascination with this pair of tables. We call it the Adam tables. This was a really glamorous architect in England in the late 1700s. He was doing all the Tony houses in London, and he was doing one particular house for an aristocrat, it turns out. I learned all this from Eileen. And he had seen these slabs, the wood, the beautiful gilded wood, they're just the delivery system for these Florentine slabs of scagliola. I didn't know what scagliola was. Apparently it's plaster and different kinds of rocks that are pushed together to look like marble and then painted. And this is a rarefied art form. Well, Eileen is an expert on scagliola, and it was her sort of dying wish to come see these beautiful slabs on these tables. And so she came forward and she told us all about them. And after she got to see them, she wrote an incredible paper. Well, anyway, in one of the sort of premier antique periodicals, the Burlington magazine. So it was her life dream, and she published these tables in that magazine, and Scagliola fans were thrilled. So this is one example of an expert coming forward and being thrilled to see something that they thought maybe no one would ever see again. These tables had not been seen since 1920.
And those tables are there for the public to view today?
Yes, right. They're on view on the tour in the home, yes.
So next time I tour, I'm going to have to keep an eye out for them. Now I'm really intrigued. That's certainly a hidden treasure.
Yes.
So, Frank, how did you approach things with the archives
Yeah, I wanted to
what you
talk a
found.
little bit about the importance of the collection. As a cultural heritage institution, the collections team are the stewards of the Annenberg legacy, as well as maintaining the historical records of Sunnylands. And we do know that the Annenbergs wanted their estate to become a museum and have the public enjoy it. So when they took residence in 1966, they began carefully collecting and saving everything, every piece of paper you can imagine. And as I went through the collection, I would find little memos, little scraps of paper, handwritten notes, telephone call messages. They kept everything, receipts, invoices, you name it. And then in 2015, we had an insurance appraisal performed on 2,500 items out of the archive and out of the library to give us an idea of what the insurance coverage we needed. And in the particular report from Robert Suter, the appraiser, there are two statements he made about the importance of the Sunnylands collection. And the second bullet in red is really what is important about the collection. And indeed, in terms of the scale, scope, and educational mission, the closest analogy to be found is that of a presidential library. And this is like, it hit the home run for us when we saw this report and him calling the collection out in this manner.
I totally believe that. Yeah. And I know that you've got some treasures to share with us a little bit later on. So all of you have worked at Sunnylands for 10 years or more. Can you speak, Janice, we'll start with you, about your first impressions when you got there? And you've been there, remind everybody how long you've been there too.
Well, so I was hired in March 2008 while Mrs. Annenberg was still alive. And when the Center and Gardens project had been designed and it was almost ready to start construction. And so there was an architect's team, there was a landscape designer, there were exhibition professionals who were already on board, had gone down a long path already. And they were exceptionally talented, but no one at that point had had experience running a museum. So it was my job to develop a professional organization that could function and to be able to shape that project so that it would better serve our community. And I think that was a really wonderful challenge. I was surprised that they had gotten to that stage in the project development without using museum management advice. And I needed to get my head kind of around the Annenberg story and how it should be told. So I was thinking about this in a way to explain how it felt early on. And after I'd been there for a year, someone would ask me that question, and this was the analogy I gave them. So imagine that the train has left the station, but it left the luggage at the station. So my job was to ride alongside on a horse and throw the luggage onto the train that it hadn't picked up when it first left. And then ultimately I jumped onto the train. And when I was there, I found that there were a lot of unruly passengers who had to be controlled. And then no one actually knew where the train was headed. And so it was my job to help direct that train onto a track and really hope that we would safely arrive at a destination. And hopefully it was the destination that we wanted. So it felt like that in the early years. It was
quite an analogy.
But seriously, I would think about it over and over. Oh my gosh. So I'm showing you this slide just for fun, because this is the interior of one of those small A. Quincy Jones houses on site. We call them cottages. This photo was taken in probably 1966. So it shows the early interior furnishings. But when I arrived in 2008, it wasn't quite so coordinated. Some things had come and gone, but it was the home for the butlers who were still working because Mrs. Annenberg was living there. And so I had one butler whose bedroom and living space was next door to the bedroom that I was assigned as my office. And if I went out into the living room space, every single day there was another butler who would come and take his afternoon nap on that couch there on the side. So it wasn't quite the professional environment I had been used to, but it led me to recognize that, you know, my challenge was to assemble a professional staff to make the goals of the of Sunnylands possible.
That's amazing. I can't imagine what that must have been like. So Anne, what was your experience?
Yes, so as Janice said, she brought on a staff and she brought me on as the collections manager. So a collections manager in a museum usually goes into the bowels of the museum and you have a collection and it's been somewhat quantified and you can put your arms around it and you have some sort of a database. And even in the smallest museums, perhaps that's a card file, a card catalog, or an Excel spreadsheet, something. But in this case, Janice took me over to the house and showed me this intact residence. I mean, Mrs. Annenberg left everything exactly as she wanted it to be left. And it was glorious, as you all know, or most of you. But we needed to put everything away to make way for 2 years of restorations and upgrading this for a public space. So the glass was from 1966. The roof was old. There was a lot of work to do. And so as a collections manager, I had to figure out how to empty this house. I used a group out of San Diego, Artworks San Diego, and we worked every day, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. for 2 solid months. And remember, we didn't know what was in the house. So we would literally open up cupboards and it would be another storehouse of silver. Their budget supported their great taste. And so they collected, as Janice said, across media, and there were surprises around every corner. And of course, as museum people, you're trained to move everything with utmost care. And so we were moving, you know, on a museum standard all day long. We had a little printer in the kitchen and we were taking pictures, printing out the picture, trying to figure out what it was from the small sort of inventory we did inherit, because they had to have insurance on a lot of it. And so we did have that. So we were trying to just match that up with the insurance record, et cetera. But everything had to be out of the house to make way for the construction. We constructed these trailers on the front lawn of Sunnylands, and we rolled everything out for 2 months while we were trying to quantify it and trying to keep it all safe. We were all a little on edge, but we had a really professional team. We had no catastrophes. There were only 2 instances where an F-bomb was dropped, which isn't bad in 2 months of moving a collection. They say if you're a collections manager and you move a collection once, it's really quite something. We've moved this collection now 4 times. But that was the first time, and we were all really serious about it, and it all went pretty well.
Wow. That's just amazing. So I want to talk to I think I should have flipped to this other slide, but this is part of what you were putting away. Anne, is this what you were trying to find homes for?
Yeah, this was the offsite storage. Janice first encountered it. She was there a year before me.
Yeah. So in that idea of opening closets and drawers and the excitement of doing all of that, that happened inside the house, but it also happened in 5 offsite storage units like you're seeing right here. And the challenge for us was to determine how to handle the items that were stored out here. Were they important enough to be retained and to be handled like Anne just described as museum objects? Or were they not valuable for the purpose of telling a story going forward, and that they weren't significant actually to the life of the Annenbergs? So there was tons of stuff. We needed first to understand what it was. We needed to organize it in some way. We needed to make it safe and determine whether it had meaningful value. And so I had an example to share with you. That is, at the end of every season, so the Annenbergs would be in Sunnylands maybe from December to April. And at the end of April, they would leave and go back to Pennsylvania. And anything that was left in the house, whether it was magazines on a coffee table, whether it was books on a bedstand, whether it was new gifts, the staff knew that they could not throw anything away. So what they did was they made a list, they boxed it up, they had the list, and they put the box in storage. And in many instances, those boxes hadn't been opened in decades, because if it had been you or I, we would have thrown our magazines out. We're done. We read them. We're done. but that's not.
Oh, I stole mine too, but that's okay.
But so organizing was a long and painstaking process.
So I have this other, is this a slide that relates to that, or these boxes on the left-hand side? Is this part of your process when you were when you were putting all the boxes of books and magazines away?
Yes, this is, these slides represent our disposal process.
Okay.
In museums, there's a legit activity called disposal. And it's not throwing things away. It's actually just really ensuring, as Janice alluded to, that each object, you can make interpretive use of that object on that site. So for instance, I worked in a museum shortly in Concord, Massachusetts, and people would come in with their Civil War gowns. Well, we can certainly make great use of those gowns there, but if someone comes to Sunnylands with a Civil War gown, we may, turn it away and send it down the road to a different institution. So that's when people come to us with objects that they'd like at Sunnylands. But this was a situation where we were going through the boxes, and as Janice said, like all of us, they had things that they'd had for a long time, and maybe they were gifts, and maybe they were never used. So the way that we continue to do disposal is we don't pretend to know some of them are obvious, but we don't pretend to know the background of every single object. So we do it by committee. The gentleman in the orange shirt, Michael Comerford, was the Annenberg's major domo since they met him at the embassy in London in 1966. And he stayed with them until the end of their lives. So he has been a significant person to us, where when we look at some plates and they're still in the original packaging, we can say to Michael Comerford, Michael, were these ever used at Sunnylands? Who were they a gift from? If he says Prince Charles, we would probably elect to keep them. If he says he can't remember and Mrs. Annenberg didn't care for them, then we might elect not to keep them. So we're very, very careful. It's a painstaking process. We do it by committee, and it's an ongoing process.
Right. Got it. Frank, I think I jumped over something, but I wanted to ask you, and I saw these boxes and I was thinking they were boxes of books. You were dealing with trying to get all the books out of the house, correct? And all the paperwork?
Yeah, correct. So when I was brought on board in 2009, Mrs. Annenberg had recently passed away. And I remember that first week at the house with furniture covered in sheets, and the Janice and Kathy said, okay, you need to box up all the books, every cabinet, every drawer, every shelf. And I remember climbing ladders and trying to pull the books off and boxing the books. And while there'd be this enormous Steuben figurine on the bookshelf next to all these books, or a porcelain eagle on the table. And the other thing,
were you on your own doing this, Frank?
I was on my own. So I think I boxed maybe at least 300 boxes. There were about 3,500 books at that time around the estate and from the cottages everywhere. Arranged to have all those boxes moved to the cottage. But I remember also I was so afraid of breaking anything. I was just terrified. And then getting lost. They left me alone in this big house alone and I couldn't figure out how to get out of there. And I remember once I was looking outside a window, taking a break, and the telephone rang. And I was like, oh, do I answer this or not? Do they have a camera looking at me or not? I was just like freaking out. But it all turned out well. But I remember those kinds of early experiences. But the other thing I wanted to mention is the Annenbergs did have a staff. They had a secretary and other people helping keeping things in order. And so the correspondence files were in pretty good order. The library collection, they attempted to catalog it a few times, but everything was in a manual system. Nothing was digitized. And it wasn't until we arrived that we started working on digitizing the records. They did keep like binders, things like all the menus from the beginning. Every single day we would be able to know what was eaten and who attended that breakfast, lunch, or dinner event, the seating charts. I mean, they kept meticulous records of everything. And we're really grateful that we have that kind of history, that we can have these resources to verify, yes, this is documented here. Yes, we know.
Nothing like having staff, right?
Yes.
We should all be so lucky. Okay, so I wanted to, we covered and we just talked about the disposal of objects, which I think is really fascinating, because I think in a sense what you have is this kind of constant challenge about what's useful for the narrative going forward and what isn't, and you told me some stories behind the scenes, but I wanted to I know that you created these archives, but for a long time you had these trailers outside, right?
Yeah, that slide is shows over the duration since 2009 to 2017, the archive and library relocated from several places. We were first in the estate, the main residence, and then we moved to the cottage and converted one of the cottages into an archive library situation. Then we had to move everything out of there to this double wide trailer system. We were there for several years before we actually moved into the archive building, building B. I'd like it to be A for archives, but it's B for archives. And that's in 2017. But in terms of, let's see, the next slide.
Thank you.
So this shows sort of the various states of what I walked into. The top corner, left corner is the room of memories. This is just one corner with books, and under the cloth on the table would be more books, and under there's shelves with all kinds of albums and books. And all around the perimeter of the room are also cabinets. They had all their magazines stored in there, organized. I mean, there were a lot. So in the center up here, yes, we did inherit boxes of correspondence in this sort of mixed array. And this is Irma, one of our people who worked in the archive, trying to organize the correspondence. They did identify the correspondence and had color codes. And so we were trying to group everything by the various names as a start before we actually indexed the materials. The bottom left is the hallway in the cottage. Later, that hallway had bookshelves, so the library collection could be stored there. The center picture in the bottom is our double wide trailer. This is what the archive looked like. And we had everything in that we can imagine stuffed into this room, including four people.
I remember coming to see Anne when I was researching my book, and you were still in the double wide. And I remember looking around me and going, and I think that's where the idea for this came from, that I was just so intrigued by the huge quantity of materials that you had, that you faced. That
yeah. So you can imagine when we had to move out of that trailer, all the books had to be removed. Then the shelving had to be removed and then reinstalled into the archive before we can unpack the boxes of books. And so this last image on the bottom is a portion of the archive in the archive building, still boxed up, waiting for the room to get ready for us to occupy, because the file cabinets had to be put in there. And there was just a lot of organizing and planning to make sure we had all the components in there. So it was a lot of work. It was a big job, but we're so delighted now that with our home.
And you'll never have to move again, right?
No. No.
Most importantly, you'll never have to move again. Well, the good thing is that also presumably the Annenberg Foundation was able to fund all of this, correct? Yes. So I mean, it's, you know, that's you're so lucky, I think. Most archivists, as we know, are constantly looking for space and trying to raise money to find a way to put everything into one place. So what a joy. So Anne, it was your role to launch an exhibition program for Sunnylands, correct?
That's correct. And as Janice was saying with her train analogy, you know, we were opening boxes and opening cupboards and really cementing the narrative of a formerly unknown story while we were running to build it. And so the exhibition program, I mean, it could have taken many shapes depending on who they were and what was going on in that house and who had visited and what was important to them. And so as we were opening the boxes, the narratives really revealed themselves through their objects. And as Frank mentioned, that through the menus and the guest lists, they were purposefully archival. They wanted these stories told. So really, we made a concrete decision that in this early era of this new space, we're going to celebrate stories very tied to Sunnylands and the Annenbergs. Everything we've done in the first 10 years, this first era, has been either drawing directly from their objects that they lovingly collected or with strong DNA ties to their collection. So these are just examples of some of the things that we've celebrated. And on the lower right is a case celebrating the fact that President Obama chose Sunnylands as the spot to host China's president, Xi Jinping. Well, this was developing as this exhibition was really far along in development, where we were celebrating key events that had happened at Sunnylands. So you see Barbara Sinatra's beautiful custom Halston dress there. That was just one of the stories we were telling. Well, suddenly we're the center of the universe politically, and President Obama's coming. And so we put this small case together to memorialize that. And as you can see, there's a golf ball there. He was very generous, and President Obama was really sensitive to archives. So as you can see in the middle there, there was a dinner menu on the table for each of the people dining with the president. And he was sensitive enough to know that there were archives people in the back cheering for him to sign things like that. So he signed books, he signed the menu card. He passed one menu card around the entire table. We made sure we knew exactly the place settings that were used. And we put together this quick case because we knew that when this exhibition opened, people would be curious about the president being at Sunnylands. So as Janice said with the train, we were telling the stories of the Annenberg's residency and the new history that's continuing to be made there.
That's amazing. That was just must have been a moment in time that you really weren't expecting. I think Tales of the Unexpected should be the alternative title.
It was definitely surreal because when Janice brought us all on, you know, she said it's a presidential retreat. And I thought, you know, in my wildest dreams, I wonder if a president will ever come to the Valley while I'm, you know, in the Valley or at Sunnylands. So we know we're very lucky about that.
That's pretty amazing. So when you were going through this process, talking about the unexpected, what did you come across that you thought was just unbelievable and you just didn't imagine for a moment that you would come across it?
Well, so I think this slide is mine, so I get to
Janet, sorry.
Yes, so we had tons of wonderful surprises. In the early years, there were things just regularly, and I think Frank's going to show a fun photo too. And But I thought it would be really fun to tell you that all the surprises didn't end a long time ago. This surprise happened in the spring of 2020. And so, so I'm showing you images. They have to do with what's called the caretaker's house, which is the house that's sort of outside the wall, the fence on.
It's on Tamarisk Lane, correct?
Yes, it's on Tamarisk Lane.
Mhm.
And so it's seen as being slightly different from the rest of the buildings at Sunnylands. And there was a desire to understand its history and why was it owned by the Annenbergs, you know, who designed it in the first place, et cetera. And so we were doing research in the springtime. And that image of that house, all of us have worked inside that building, gone there many, many times over 10 years. It's not an exciting architectural space, I promise you. And so, so we wanted to figure out, how did it get like this? And if you look at the photo in the lower left, you see Walter Annenberg with his, you know, safari hat, and Leonore is actually seated next to him. This photo was taken in 1965, but I want you to look at the roof line behind that little golf cart that they're in. Now, if you look over to the photograph on the upper right, you'll see a house. You'll see a space that has a wall and an open patio. And then on the far left, there's a small building. And look at the top of that roof line, and then go back and look at the photo with Walter in it. And you see a relationship, right?
Yes.
And then look at the current photo of the what is really now going to be called the manager's house, because originally what we discovered in looking at this research was that A. Quincy Jones designed that little tiny building that's there on the left side of those photos with that unusual roof line in 1964. And we had in our A.Q. Jones architectural drawings files a drawing of something called a manager's house. And so when we'd seen it before in the past, we thought, well, they must never have built this. There were a lot of drawings coming out in 1964 at the time the cottages were designed. So we didn't think about it, but I'm showing it to you here. I colored it with yellow. It's a simple little structure with one large room and a storage room and a bathroom. And what you see actually is that Quincy Jones was asked to design an office for the manager of the property in the 60s who lived in this small house. And in order for him to make any sense of placing a new building next to a nondescript kind of house, he made this horizontal line that connected the house with his little office.
That's so intriguing. That's so, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you can see it now. But if you look at that picture of the current view of the house, you see that something else happened in the meantime. And so what we found out was that in 1995, a Palm Desert architect worked with members of the Annenberg staff, and they filled in between the two buildings and expanded and added extra bedrooms and bathrooms, enlarged the house, punched it out in the front. And suddenly that A. Quincy Jones little office was hidden and consumed by this house, and the story was forgotten. Essentially, none of us understood that we had really an intact little structure that had just been visually lost with that change. So the fun part of that is that as we go forward, we now know it. We may remove some of those later editions and isolate it, and it gets added to our collection of A. Quincy Jones buildings.
It's so funny too, because I found an A. Quincy Jones house at Thunderbird Country Club, and that's going in front of the Historic Preservation Commission next week. So there were 2 hidden A. Quincy Jones buildings in Rancho Mirage that we didn't know about. That's so great. So Anne, I'm going to ask you about the mysteries and unexpected things that you found.
Yeah, so there were lots of mysteries because, again, this was a very private space, a very private family, and we didn't know what to expect. So there are, of course, threads of repeating motifs through all of their collecting. But one of my favorite collections is a delightful group of souvenirs that they assembled. And unlike the rest of us who buy T-shirts or shot glasses or books or what have you when we travel, the Annenbergs were inspired to build monuments on their grounds based on their travels. And we, of course, put this together over time. We began to understand that the connectivity between these disparate monuments sprinkled across the grounds, the connectivity is they're inspired by their travels. And so we have a totem pole inspired by Canadian travel and friends. We have a Chinese pavilion inspired by being in England from 69 to 74 and seeing the follies on the great English estates. When you come into the front gate on Sinatra and come up the meandering path, the first sculpture you see is Canadian, Art Price. They saw a very similar sculpture by Art Price in an airport on their way to Europe, and they admired it and pursued the artist for a similar piece, aviary aluminum birds for their grounds. And then this piece, before we sort of put this story together, that all of these disparate things meant that they were their souvenirs, we saw this white neoclassical bench on the grounds. I have 2 views of it on the left. It's white, very straightforward, neoclassical. And then I took a picture the other day from the house. As you can see, it's intentionally barred from being seen from the house. We weren't sure why, but we kept that intact because there's a narrative there and we're not sure what's going on. Later in our findings, we found this delightful picture of Walter Annenberg and Leonore Annenberg on the right with their pals cruising through the Greek islands in 1980. And they took this picture on the island of Delos. And we understood then why the staff called this bench the Delos bench. And we inquired further, and sure enough, they had loved that bench. Walter wanted one for the grounds, and sure enough, the slabs of white marble were delivered to the site by helicopter so that the trucks would not destroy the golf course. And they assembled this new bench, referencing the old bench. And Mrs. Annenberg, we're told, was not particularly thrilled with this white slab of white marble that she could see from the house. And so a hedge was erected. This is the perfect compromise in a marriage. Walter got his bench and Leonore got her hedge. So this is one of my favorite collections at Sunnylands.
It's so fun, I'm curious to know what that bench looked like from the house, because all you would have seen would have been the back kind of curve to it. And it probably looked like, I don't know, someone stuck something from a bathtub or something out of it. And it probably just didn't look that great. And I think it's so wonderful that they built this huge hedge around it. It kind of, I don't know, it looks like Bart Simpson's hair now. Anyway, I digress. But that's such a great story. And so amazing that you found the photograph. So you were able to join the dots. We all love doing that. So Frank, what did you come across that you really loved?
Yeah, as an outsider having an insider's view of the activities that occurred at Sunnylands, certainly reading over 3,000 presidential letters and indexing them was really a great joy to see the signatures, the letterheads that were used, all the royal family correspondence, and the movers and shakers that the Annenbergs knew, politicians, business people, journalists, you name it. They I got to see all of that. And also reading the inscriptions and looking at the signatures in various books. At least 1/3 of the collection have autographs, signatures, or inscriptions. And so that was fun. But what's really delightful is finding something tucked inside a book. And so this particular item comes from a book that Richard Nixon wrote and gave to the Annenbergs. And up on the inscription page, it says number 4, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, number 4, okay, so it says number 4. But it wasn't until this letter showed up in the book that it gave us a different insight as to what number 4 means. And in the center of the second paragraph, it talks about who received the first volume, Pat, the second, Tricia and Ed, the third, Julie and David, and then the fourth is to you whom we consider to be members of our family. And so that really helps tie the fact that it said number 4, and then we have a letter that tells us what number 4 means. Some of the surprises I did find were in our current Agam exhibition, there'll be a maquette of the Sunnylands painting, as well as 2 limited edition prints that I found in a book. I found one day, I came out of the library area and said, Anne, look what I just found. And she's, what did you find? And I said, a 4-page handwritten letter thanking the Annenbergs for the painting that they gave of the portrait of Benjamin Franklin. And this is handwritten by Jackie Kennedy. And I was like, and that was 1962. Wow. And it just happened to be stuck in a file folder, and that was it. But this particular find, for each of the 80th birthday, the respective 80th birthday celebrations, the staff collected letters from everybody wishing them happy birthday. And as I was going through each of these, they're probably 8, not 10-inch compilations. I was going through trying to index and seeing which things needed to be removed before preservation. And these 2 are watercolors, original watercolors done by Andrew Wyeth. So we'd have 3 Andrew Wyeth watercolors on his personal stationery. And when I saw that, I was just like, that goes into the safe. We have, I mean, really? Not to be, yeah. And the Andrew Wyeth Foundation back east, they did come out and look at these because they had heard there was something, but they never saw it. And when we wrote about this in RM Magazine, they saw that and they immediately came out to verify that these are Wyeth drawings.
Have you ever exhibited those?
No.
Will you?
I don't know if we could put a show together with Wyeth and other things, because you have to have a bunch of objects, but we might be able to put a case together.
Right. I'm looking at it on a big monitor. If anyone's at home, they can zoom in. It's really worth looking at the Wyeth on the left-hand side. If you're a Wyeth fan, as I am, it's just kind of astonishing to see a small watercolor like that with his signature and everything on it. So special. Yep. I can't imagine what that was like.
Well, the special, also what's special is the one on the right, the happy birthday to Lee. When you look very closely, you can see all the pencil strokes he was doing to try to figure out what the final composition is before he filled in the colors. And so that's just, just shows you, it was a work in progress and he started finalizing it.
And that's,
so there's lots of.
So that picture on the right is also a Wyeth?
Both of these are separate Wyeth. The other one is the birthday letter to Walter Annenberg.
Wow, that's so amazing. So much of what we're talking about falls under the umbrella of preservation. Can you, Janice, speak about your challenges in working towards the preservation of Sunnylands? I know that there was a lot to be done with the building itself.
Right. So my job really has been focused on the capital projects at Sunnylands. So it's had to do with the building part of Sunnylands and the restoration and renovation project, certainly. And the thing that drove us in approaching that particular project and then subsequent projects, but the estate project needed to reflect a balance of preservation concerns with adaptive reuse, because no longer was this a private home. It was going to be a high-level retreat center and the public was going to access it. That changes some of the needs of the space. And then we are in the 21st century at a time when water issues are huge and sustainable concerns are critical. So we felt like we had to always balance choices about preservation, reuse, and sustainability. And so I picked this as an example of a balance. Here you see the roof. The pink roof was originally designed as a white cement roof by A. Quincy Jones. And then Leonora Annenberg wanted it to be pink because of the colors on the mountains. Great. Moisture was trapped between the paint and the cement, and it had to be painted every 3 to 5 years, and the cement degraded. So when the trust inherited the house, the roof needed to be replaced. But we didn't want to do that same practice going forward. We didn't think that was a very sustainable practice. And as a result, we were able to identify a new kind of material that could be integrally colored pink. And then we developed 80 different molds with different brushstroke textures and patterns on them, so that the 8,000 tiles that needed to go on this roof would look like they were painted. And so in the end, we were able to achieve a situation where the visual part exactly mimics what it looked like before, but it was done in a sustainable way. We don't have to paint anything. It will last longer. And so we felt that was a reasonable approach to balance. And then I have a second slide, another slide. And this one speaks to the issue of, again, restoring something. So the photo in the upper left shows you how this entry courtyard looked from 1995 to 2010. And in 1995, the original courtyard, and that's shown in the photo on the upper right, had discolored, it had cracked, it needed to be maintained and attended to. But the solution in 1995 was to install these pink pavers on top of that base. Well, the problem, of course, is that addition of pink, of a pattern, really, it made my eyes hurt, certainly, with the A. Quincy Jones patterns. And so in order to go back to the original design intent, we removed the pavers, but we had another issue at the time as well. And that was, this was going to be open to the public. And you can see in that upper photograph on the right, there's one little step. You see the grass and a step. Well, we were going to have to install a ramp to address ADA issues because the public would need to come in. And we came up with a much more elegant solution, which was to basically regrade this portion in front of the house so that there didn't need to be a step. And we could then come as close as possible to the original design intent with the same kind of aggregate being replicated in front of the house. So we're really, really happy with how that turned out. Yeah. And I want to make the point that it's one thing to preserve something, but in a place like ours where we continue to make history and there is an ongoing commitment to growth and architecture and aesthetics and design. It means that every project we do needs to have a reference to the historic house, and it doesn't need to look exactly like it, but there needs to be some kind of reference. And in this case, I thought I'd use the entryway as an example, because when you come to the Fred Fisher building, the Center and Gardens that you see in the lower left, you see that there is a circular entry court. But in the middle of it, unlike at the historic estate where you have that large Mexican column, here you have in the new project, arid landscape plants. It's a planter of cactus, and that sort of goes with that garden. But on the lower right, in the last big construction project we did, this is the entry court in front of the administration building. And there, again, the design uses that entry circle, but in the middle of it are rocks. And why, you might say, well, how'd you get from, the lushness of a parkland estate to these rocks? Well, our campus was, one of its goals was to be a net zero water use project. And we wanted to use only arid landscape plants and lots of rock in order to reduce the call on water. So I think the point I just wanted to make is that we've consistently really worked to ensure that the contemporary projects achieve goals that are appropriate for the 21st century while pulling from the legacy of the 20th.
Well, you've done just an incredible job, and really hats off to all of you. So Anne, I'm going to ask you, I know you have a great story to tell about this, and it's one of the most intriguing, I think, from a preservation point of view, but also, just trying to manage a construction process. So Anne, tell us about what happened with Eve.
Right. So during those 2 years of construction, I was the collections voice on the site. And it should be stated that our core metric of success is to change the world through the power of place and hold important meetings there. So that's our core metric. That's what drives all of our activities. So being the collections manager, obviously this isn't a museum where my voice might have a different weight than it does on this site, where our core metric is to change the world through the power of place and meetings. So when I arrived as the collections manager, I was in these meetings with Janice, and that's Charles Birnbaum there in that collection of people in the center on the far left from the Cultural Landscape Foundation. We had Peyton Hall in and out. We had various consultants, Fred Fisher. We had a lot of heavy hitters on this site. Everyone brought their A game, and this was an important moment in American sort of restorations of an important home with lofty goals. And so I was just but one voice at the table. And I remember talking about the construction and taking down the roof and moving all the tiles and doing all of this construction right in the center. And I sort of pointed out that Auguste Rodin's Eve sculpture is sited right in the center of this home. And people found that mildly interesting, but not super interesting. And so I actually had to do something that museum people are loath to do, which is I had to pull a few people aside and tell them how much Eve was worth so that I could get a little bit of attention on it. And once it was discovered what it was worth, there was a lot of activity around protecting Eve. And so there were lots of spirited conversations about sort of creating shear walls with plywood and what that can withstand. And I got this lovely in situ crate for our beloved Eve. And they even gave me a little window that locked that I could open so that I could look at her once in a while, make sure she was okay. But it was just, collections care on a site that is purposefully about adaptive reuse and that's used. And a lot of museums have to use their spaces, right? We don't have to, we choose to, but a lot have to, like for weddings and things. And so collections care is necessarily tricky. It's still tricky. We still balance it. Janice and I are in lots of conversations where there's going to be 30 people in this room. What's the state of the furniture? How do we balance red wine around these very glamorous fabrics? So it's ongoing. It's not always easy, and it's a balancing act, protecting a collection in this setting.
Just such an amazing thought for having to do battle with the kind of construction industry people who just want to do their job, and to have to try and balance that, do that juggling act of like, no, you got to listen to me. This is valuable. You don't want to mess it up. So congratulations. That was a real coup, I think. So Frank, we're going to come to you for the last slide on rehousing materials and equipment and storage containers and everything under a single roof. Talk to us about that.
Sure. So in the 11 years since I've been at Sunnylands, we finally have gotten to a place that the Annenberg legacy materials are pretty well organized. They've been rehoused into acid-free folders, Mylar holders, stored into fireproof file cabinets. We have metal shelving, the right types of storage boxes. It's taken a long time to do that. You know, staples have been removed, paper clips have been removed. Believe it or not, all the architectural drawings at one point were all stored in numerous garbage cans, rolled up and stored in garbage cans. We managed to unroll all of those and flatten them out and store them in flat files now into map folders. So we're working on protecting many parts of the collection. What I want to show up in the top left is what the archive room looks like now. And around the perimeter of the room are our library collection, and in the center is the archives, and then we have various file cabinets. We do collect materials now since the center opened and the retreats occur at Sunnylands. We collect all the materials, menus, all the lists of participants, the agendas, those sorts of things, all the various drawings related to the the new buildings that have been built. We collect those. And since we've had this pandemic, I've been collecting all the management memos related to COVID, because at some point in the future, we want to know what we said, what we did as an organization. And so those are important. But one week I came into, this was right outside my office, and these boxes just appeared over the weekend. And these are boxes, they cleaned out the Los Angeles Annenberg, Sunnylands Annenberg office and closed that down because they were moving to Washington. And all those materials all were sent over to me, which means I went through them, tried to figure out what we had, what we needed, didn't need. So that, you know, the job never ends. There's always portions of the collection that we work on, you know, photographs, we get photographs, we receive donations, we have an oral history program. I mean, there's a lot of activity around the archives and the library.
I'm hearing loads of sirens going on in the background. It's funny. I said to somebody, shut your windows and make sure we don't have any sirens in the background. We never get sirens in Rancho Mirage. It's such a kind of Los Angeles or New York thing. And all of a sudden I'm hearing all this stuff going on in the background. So excuse me. Sorry, Frank. So the incredible thing about that was that they didn't actually even tell you that these boxes were going to show up, right? You just showed up.
I didn't know about them, but you know, they're put away now. We've kept what we need.
I guess they figured, well, they've got lots of storage space now. They've got this lovely new archive building. We can send all our stuff there. Hey, wow. You know, I've been clearing out my garage. Would you mind if I just took a few boxes off of there? I'm gonna stop sharing the screen and let everyone have a look at everybody. And we have a couple of questions up here. So from Tracy Conrad, who says, congratulations to you all for a fascinating presentation and for all your diligent work. It makes cleaning up my something, I can't see it, I have to scroll over, seem less daunting. And I feel the same way. I mean, every time we've been clearing out our house and our garage, and I feel like, oh my gosh, this is nothing compared to what you all went through. Sinia mentions, were the storage trailers climate controlled to protect the materials from the desert's extreme weather variations?
It's a great question. Yes, we installed smoke alarms, lots of pest control, obviously, and alarms and climate control. Yeah.
And now you obviously you have, you know, the state of the art storage conditions with everything that needs to be sort of in cool vacuum conditions.
Yes, yeah. And, you know, we're very spoiled by that. We're very appreciative. And it should be said that that was not always something that was necessarily going to happen. It evolved as the collection took shape. As you know, and when we arrived, Janice, I think, had 2 binders that this was their presidential letter collection. And it was astounding and phenomenal, and it had been appraised. Well, as Frank said, as he continued to go through boxes and boxes, well, the presidential collection expanded by, 100 times. And so the building really followed, that it was necessary to protect this collection.
Chris Gore says, well done presentation, learn so much that you don't get on the Sunnylands tour, A star. So the good news is for all our attendees and for those who weren't able to attend is that we have been recording this. And so at some point, I think Sunnylands is going to have this probably somewhere on your website or available for the public, and Preservation Mirage will do as well. So that's something that we're obviously going to be doing in the future. I don't see any other questions. Oh, here's a couple more questions. How much was the Rodin valued at? Are you allowed to say?
I'm not allowed to say. Yeah, museum people, we try not to ever give a price tag to the collection for many reasons.
Right. And am I right in saying, though, that of all the other artwork within Sunnylands was actually reproduced, and then the art collection was given to, I can't remember which museum, but the original.
The Rodin's original. The only items which are digital reproductions are the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist paintings. Anything that doesn't fall in that category is original at the site. And that's why I mentioned there is a small 20th century sculpture collection. Rodin, we have, I think, 5 ARPs, Giacometti, there are some very fine sculptural pieces, but the paintings are largely at the Metropolitan Museum in New York.
Right. So I think I asked this question a long time ago, but was there anything just really horrible or weird that you came across that I think you mentioned something about a shampoo sink. I mean, were there decisions like that where you kind of went, no, really, this serves no useful purpose to our narrative or to the public?
No, Anne needs to talk about the shampoo sink.
Oh, well, the shampoo sink became a real central issue, and it was really emblematic of the struggles we had in that room with all the different voices. So Janice knows that, when you walk into a billionaire's home, you're not surprised by the pink marble floor. You're not surprised by the chandeliers. You're not even maybe surprised by the Rodin. There's certain things your eyes expect, but time after time, we would walk people through the house for a variety of reasons, vendors, et cetera, and they'd come around the corner into Mrs. A's private bathroom, and they'd see that she had her own shampoo sink built in, that you go to, the hairdresser, and there's a sink and it's built in, and they ask you to like that. She had that. And it was just for some reason, it was a delightful surprise to everyone. And everybody went, oh, she has a shampoo. It's like that just set her life apart on such a personal level for the billionaire kind of, I hate to trivialize it that way, but it was just like your eyes weren't expecting it. Like in the back of the house, this is something that made her life quite glamorous and convenient, right? And so we struggled to keep the shampoo sink in place as historians. Janice and I, strapped ourselves to the bulldozer as we did many times, because this was a story we found really powerful, but in the end, we lost that small battle. We gained other battles, but we lost that small battle, but we saved the shampoo sink. We documented it, should the future museum folks want to reinstall it, we have it. But that was one small battle that we lost.
Yeah,
So-
and we lost it because there had to be an ADA bathroom installed at the, in the house. It was a requirement, and we all understood that. And then
Right.
for that, we tried to find alternate locations. But I also think we did some interesting don't destroy part of the room and build in front of it kind of work, so that if they ever go backwards, it's possible to go backwards.
That's great. Okay, let me just see. I think we might have we've got another one. Mary Engvall says, congratulations to you all for this important and impressive preservation work. I'm curious if you know if the Annenbergs built the home with the intent of hosting world leaders and being a place for addressing such meaningful topics, or did that evolve as they lived there? Very good question.
My answer is it evolved as they lived there. It started out much more informally, although of course the first among the first visitors were Dwight and Mamie Eisenhower. So, I mean, they had a celebrated group of friends, but I think they wanted their desire to continue the specialness of this creative place grew over time, and even more particularly after their return from England. But from the beginning, they saved everything. So they had a basic approach to potentially this is going to be an important place. I don't know if Anne wants to expand on that.
Yeah, or Frank, we found in one article, I think Frank found it, an interview 10 years into the house, so 76, around that time, 76, 78, where Walter says, we envisioned some sort of a museum, something. I think he recognized that the site had taken on some cultural heritage properties, and that, as Janice said, that they were both historians. They recognized that the house had some special properties and now some special social history. So he was talking about it informally about 10, 12 years after 66, so in the 70s.
I guess by that time their visitors book was such that they knew that they were going to, and obviously, as I said earlier, having staff that were able to catalogue everything is just such, I mean, that's like the royal family in England. That's what everybody does in those situations. And, it was very much a thing back in the 50s and 60s where people did keep notes about who, like visitors books and all those sorts of things. I mean, everybody in England used to have those. Now, of course, no one bothers because you've got it on your Google Calendar and you don't need to check anymore. But, that's the amazing part about physical paper records too, is that it's just so much fun to be able to look at hard copies of things like menus and invite lists and who did what when and so on. It's such a great story, especially if you're nerdy about that stuff like I am. What else? John Orlin says, very good presentation and stories. Hopefully more of the collection will continue to be available in the Visitors Centre when it reopens. Do you have any future plans at this point?
Well, Anna is working on next year's exhibition as we speak, and the exhibition that is currently up at the center is on Agam. It's called In Motion Agam at Sunnylands. It was open for a whopping 5 days. It looks like we're still in the purple tier, and until we can get to the red tier at the moment, we can't reopen the center, but there will it's a visually stunning exhibition, and it's drawn from our collection of agams as well as those of the Palm Springs Art Museum. So it's always that balance of what can we pull from the archives, and then what story can we tell that's interesting and that people haven't seen before.
Right.
And Frank is the curator of that show. It is stunning. He did a masterful job. And it's on our website, a walkthrough. I know everybody's, screen time is what it is, but if someone's curious, it really is a beautiful show. So it is on our site until we can reopen.
What I wanted
Sorry.
What I wanted to also say is, because we are able to have the archives, which are the primary source materials, they were so critical in our development of our various exhibitions and also our catalogs. We were able to publish our catalogs based on the archive materials we uncovered and the stories we uncovered. And so, we will continue to go through that archive. The other thing I wanted to mention is we have done some what we call from the vault activities, where we invite the public to the archive. We bring out certain materials from the archive and we do little presentations. And so at some point, look for those. And if you really want to see what goes on in the archives, we're happy to have you join us one evening.
That's a very nice invitation. I'm sure we'll be taking you up on that. Jeremy Hunt wants to know what happened to the items that were disposed of. Were they donated, sold, garage sale, yard sale?
Yeah, in the museum world, there are various ethics and rules around that. So you don't want to trade on your name. And so we can't put something out into the marketplace and take it to Misty's and say, price it high, it came from Sunnylands. We have to do it anonymously. Of course, savvy collectors will sometimes recognize something at auction that's come from the Met or come from the Fog at Harvard or what have you, because museums are constantly refining their collections. And but we're very careful to put it into auctions or sometimes it goes to consignment stores, that kind of thing. Or sometimes another institution, an item will be perfect for another institution. And so we contact them.
Okay. Scott Karp says, do the Annenberg children or family have any continued interest in Sunnylands?
Yes, so our board of trustees is made up of 9 family members. And so 4 of them are the Walter side of the family and 5 of them are Leonore's side of the family, their daughters and grandchildren. And so, yes, they have a legal and fiscal responsibility for overseeing the trust, the Annenberg Foundation Trust at Sunnylands. And they are really committed to making certain that we achieve the goals that were stated in the trust document that Walter and Leonore, wrote.
Sinya asks about the frames of the artwork. She says they're very traditional in a mid-century home. Is that a function of not removing a masterwork from its frame, or is that a personal preference?
Well, so Anne, do you want to tell the frame story?
Sure. So the Annenbergs liked carved gold frames on their paintings. That was their predilection. And so when they worked closely with the Metropolitan Museum to donate their painting collection to the Met, they sent the frames with the collection and had the frames reproduced, hand-carved gilded frames reproduced, so that when you walk in the house and you see the paintings, the frames are exactly as the Annenbergs wanted them. So you can really experience the last private installation of that collection. You can go to the Met and see them, but they really wanted people to understand the placement of those paintings and how informing they were to that space. And yes, they loved those frames. It seems to have been their taste.
I mean, what Sinya says, it raises a lot of I think a lot of people are surprised when they go to Sunnylands that the architecture is mid-century, but the Annenberg's taste wasn't mid-century. The Annenberg's taste was actually very traditional, I think. I mean, Billy Haynes' furniture design aside, I find that, you know, I did a talk some time ago about stately homes of Rancho Mirage, and I feel Sunnylands obviously is a stately home in the sense of an English stately home, that when you go in there, you're seeing, you know, not just a lifetime's collection of stuff, but actually, you know, obviously their own personal taste, which was traditional.
Well, and I think that's what's so unusual about Sunnylands is that it works. So that you have this mid-century architectural space. It's filled with furniture that is all consistently Hollywood Regency style. So there's that traditional and craftsman-like fabric on shapes that are more modern. And then you have the Annenberg's own art taste. And so the art within the space reflects that. And so it's not a consistent mid-century, you know, architecture and furniture and art. It's not that. It's a very unique mixture of those three elements.
Brilliant. Well, I think that we should probably wrap it up. We've lost probably about half a dozen attendees, which isn't too bad, all things considered, but we have been going for an hour and a half, and I think people's attention span is probably beginning to wander off to, you know, their dinner at least. Yes. So I want to thank you again so much, Janice, Anne, and Frank, for doing this with Preservation Mirage. It's been such a pleasure and a delight to, I'm sure, not just for me, but for everybody, I hope, to really hear a bit more about what your experience was, because it isn't something that visitors to Sunnylands really know about. And I think for me and for obviously all our members, it's really been a bit of a peek behind the red velvet curtain to see what was really there. So thank you. And we will be notifying everybody, all our members, and I'm sure Sunnylands will be, as soon as we have this presentation ready for viewing. And please, everybody, tell your friends about preservationmirage.org and join up, especially if you live in or have a house in Rancho Mirage. But if you're interested in preservation, we welcome everyone to join. It's free. You just go onto our website, preservationmirage.org, and click on join. We're working on a new website at the moment. Hopefully that'll be live sometime in the new year. And stay tuned to your emails and social media, because we'll be doing another of these in December, fingers crossed. Hopefully another fascinating interview with a homeowner, I hope. We'll be doing these certainly as long as the pandemic lasts, and if not beyond. So please join us again, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks so much. Thanks again. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.